The sea has always carried secrets, whispered in the crash of waves and the hush of tides. On nights when the moon is high, sailors say you can hear the ocean breathe. It sighs, it roars, it calls, as if alive with moods older than time itself. To those who live by the coast, the sea is not just water, but a neighbor. Sometimes it gives, bringing fish, calm winds, and safe passage across the horizon. Sometimes it takes, with sudden swells, shifting sands and storms that last for days. Yet, every tale of the ocean carries a name spoken with awe and respect. Poseidon, lord of the deep, the one whose trident can stir calm or fury. He is said to walk beneath the waves, unseen yet felt in every tide. His presence is not always wrath, but always power, vast and unshaken. The sea reflects him, endless and untamed, beautiful and terrifying at once. And there is one tale that echoes louder than the rest, told for generations. It is the story of the Endless Storm, a gift, a warning, a mystery eternal. A storm without end, where the horizon vanished and time stood still. Tonight, we enter that story and listen to the sea's voice once more. The village by the shore lived in rhythm with the sea, each tide marking the pulse of their days. Children played along the sand, their laughter chasing gulls that circled in the bright sky. Fishermen prepared their nets at dawn, whispering small prayers before touching the waves. They believed the sea was alive, a companion that could bless or betray at will. The ocean gave food, pearls, and salt, but also demanded respect in every gesture. At night, lanterns flickered across the bay, guiding boats back like stars drawn to earth. The villagers often told stories around the fire, voices mingling with the sound of surf. Some spoke of gentle tides as Poseidon's smile, a rare gift of calm and mercy. Others recalled sudden storms, fierce and wild, as signs of his restless temper. Yet none doubted his presence, for the sea itself was his throne and kingdom. The elders remembered days when offerings of shells, wine, or song were left by the shore. They said Poseidon listened not with ears, but through the movement of the tides. When fish were plenty, he was pleased. When storms came, he asked to be remembered. The younger ones laughed sometimes, thinking these were just tales to keep fear alive. But the old ones warned, the sea forgets nothing, and it waits to be honored. The horizon stretched wide, endless, glowing gold at sunset, blue and silver by dawn. It was a boundary and a promise, a doorway to lands unseen, always mysterious. Sailors carried songs of distant ports, speaking of wonders beyond the rolling waves. Yet no matter how far they traveled, they said the sea always brought them home. Life seemed simple, yet always tied to the shifting moods of the ocean. Mothers told children to listen to the wind, for it carried whispers from the deep. Fathers taught sons and daughters to bow slightly before the tide touched their toes. Every gesture was a pact, every prayer a thread binding them to the sea. They lived in balance, neither masters nor slaves, but guests at a vast banquet. And in this balance, there was peace, fragile as foam, but enduring as the tide. The sea lulled them into trust, cradling their lives with its rhythm of rise and fall. For years, storms came and passed, never staying longer than their patience could bear. Yet, beneath the calm, something ancient stirred, as if the ocean held its breath. The villagers did not know then that the horizon was waiting to vanish, nor could they see the first signs of a storm without end gathering far away. They only lived as they always had, in harmony, in faith, in awe of the sea. This was the calm before the endless storm, the last breath before eternity changed. The first signs came quietly, almost too subtle to notice. like whispers beneath the sound of waves. Fishermen returned with tales of tides that shifted strangely, pulling nets in directions unknown. The moon's pull seemed broken, as if the ocean no longer obeyed its ancient rhythm. Children pointed at clouds shaped like tridents, stretching across the horizon, sharp and gleaming white. The air grew heavier, carrying the scent of salt and something deeper, like stone underwater. At dusk, the sea shimmered oddly, reflecting not the sky above, but something darker. Some said it was nothing, just the tricks of light and restless imagination. But the elders frowned, their eyes clouded with memories older than the youngest waves. They remembered stories of signs, omens marking the moment before Poseidon stirred. One elder spoke softly, almost a whisper. When the sea forgets its rest, we must listen. The villagers gathered around the fire that night, silence heavier than any storm. The flames crackled, but even their warmth could not ease the unease in their bones. A fisherman swore he saw dolphins vanish, leaving the bay empty for the first time. Birds flew inland, their wings cutting sharp lines across a reddened evening sky. Even the dogs refused to wander near the shore, tails tucked, eyes wide. The ocean's song had changed, no longer gentle but deep, endless and unfamiliar. Children who once laughed at the waves now sat quietly, clinging to their mothers. And though no wind blew, the sea rippled as if moved by an unseen hand. Some wondered if Poseidon was angry, but others thought he was simply awake. For gods, they said, did not dream as mortals do, but slumbered like the sea. And when the sea woke, the world must brace for whatever followed. The elders spoke of an ancient prophecy, one carved into stone long forgotten. It told of a storm without end, born not of punishment, but of remembrance. When the horizon disappears, the prophecy said, the sea will reclaim its voice. The villagers sat in silence, their eyes drawn to the dark horizon. Each swell seemed taller, each wave carrying a rhythm too steady to be natural. It was not yet a storm, but it was no longer calm. The sea was holding its breath, and so too did the people of the shore. The night stretched long, filled with uneasy dreams and restless shadows. Some dreamed of tridents of light, others of endless water swallowing the sky. When dawn broke, it brought no relief, only a strange pale glow on the sea. The horizon looked closer, as though the ocean had shifted toward the village overnight. The people stood at the edge of the sand, eyes wide, waiting for a sign. The elders bowed their heads, whispering prayers into the wind that did not move. For they knew the omen had come, and the endless storm was drawing near. The storm did not arrive with a warning, but with a sudden roar that shook the air. Winds rose from nowhere, twisting sand into spirals that danced like restless spirits. The sea swelled high, its waves crashing harder than any memory could recall. Clouds gathered thick and heavy, pressing down on the world like a closing hand. The horizon vanished, swallowed by a curtain of water and endless gray sky. The villagers stood frozen, watching as the ocean turned into a wall of sound. It was not rain at first, only a mist carried by the violent breath of wind. Then the first drops fell, sharp and cold, striking like stones on the skin. Boats moored by the bay groaned, their ropes pulling taut against the furious tide. Lanterns were blown out, one by one, as if the night itself demanded darkness. The storm spoke not in words, but in rhythms of thunder and crashing waves. Some said they heard a voice in the wind, deep and vast, calling a name. It was Poseidon's breath, the elders whispered, his spirit moving through the tempest. Children clung to their mothers, eyes wide as the sea stretched taller than houses. The air itself seemed alive, rushing, howling, pulling at every door and window. The villagers moved together, gathering in the meeting hall, a fragile shelter of wood. Inside, silence mixed with the storm's roar, hearts beating faster than the thunder outside. The elders reminded them this was not wrath, but presence, a reminder of the sea. Still, the fear was heavy, pressing against their chests like the weight of deep water. Hours stretched into eternity as the storm raged without pause, without breath. Waves crashed upon the shore, breaking stones, reshaping sand as if carving a new world. No star could be seen, no moon, no sky, only the endless storm above. The villagers lost sense of time, not knowing if it was night or day. Each roar of thunder felt like the heartbeat of a giant beneath the sea. Some prayed aloud, others whispered, and some only listened to the storm's rhythm. But no one dared to speak loudly, as if afraid the storm might answer. A child asked softly if the sea was angry, but no elder gave reply. For they knew the truth. The storm was not anger, but awakening. Poseidon had stirred, and the sea had followed, endless and unrelenting. The meeting hall shook as winds battered its frame, rattling beams and shutters. Still it held, as though the sea allowed them this fragile refuge for a time. Outside, the coastline changed with every hour. Dunes flattened, cliffs bitten by waves. The world they knew was being rewritten by water, word by word, tide by tide. And yet, amid the fear, there was awe. For they were living inside a myth. The first roar of the storm had not just begun. It had no end in sight. Days began to blur into nights, though no one could see the sun or the stars anymore. The storm covered the sky in a thick shroud of gray that never lifted, never broke. It was as if the heavens themselves had forgotten how to shine through the endless clouds. The villagers marked time only by their hunger, by sleep, by the rhythm of their fear. The sound of thunder became so constant, it felt like the heartbeat of the world itself. Children stopped asking when it would end, for they sensed no answer would ever come. The horizon was gone, erased by walls of water and mist that swallowed all distance. Fishermen who once read the tides could no longer tell if it was morning or night. The sea seemed endless now, stretching not outward, but inward, consuming thought and memory. Some wondered if they had slipped into another world, where time itself was trapped. Even the birds had vanished, no gulls crying, no wings cutting across the storm. The silence of their absence made the roar of the storm feel even greater. Boats, left tied along the shore, had vanished one by one, carried away by waves. The villagers mourned them not as loss of wood, but as friends torn from their side. Still, there was awe in the storm's strange beauty, a power both terrifying and sacred. Flashes of lightning carved shapes across the sky like glowing tridents of Poseidon's hand. Each strike lit the waves in silver, revealing peaks higher than houses, moving like giants. The storm became a mirror, showing mortals how small they were before the sea. Yet within the endless night, the villagers clung to one another and to old faith. They told stories by dim firelight, voices trembling yet steady, binding courage into words. One elder spoke of storms that had lasted weeks, but never one without end. Another told of sailors who vanished into the deep, yet were guided home in dreams. The children listened with wide eyes, caught between terror and wonder at these ancient tales. They learned the storm was not just a trial, but a story they were living. Still, the longer it raged, the heavier doubt became, pressing like water in their lungs. How long could food last when no boats could sail and no nets could be cast? How long could spirits endure when each dawn looked the same as every night? The storm seemed eternal, not destroying all at once, but erasing slowly, steadily, without pause. It was not a storm to survive, but a storm to understand, a mystery alive. And though their fear grew, so too did a strange reverence, as if chosen to witness. For somewhere within the endless storm, Poseidon's voice waited, hidden in the waves. The villagers did not yet know what it would say, only that it would be heard. And so they waited, hearts heavy but awake, inside the storm that knew no end. In the heart of the village, a young dreamer began to see visions no one else could see. Her name was whispered with care, for dreams in such times were seen as gifts or burdens. Each night she closed her eyes, and the storm transformed into shapes and voices of light. She walked across endless waters in sleep, hearing the sea call her by name. The voice was not harsh, but steady, deep as if rising from the ocean floor. It told her not of fear, but of paths unseen, where answers waited in silence. She saw tridents of light piercing clouds, opening passages through waves that bent like doors. And always there was a sense of presence, vast yet close, surrounding her every step. When she woke, her eyes carried shadows of those visions, wide with wonder and dread. The elders listened as she spoke, their silence heavy with the weight of memory. They knew dreams and storms were never accidents, but threads woven by the divine. Some feared she had been chosen, others feared she had been cursed by the sea. But the girl herself did not tremble, for she felt a pull stronger than fear. She believed Poseidon was not punishing, but calling, asking to be heard once more. Her dreams told of a path, not away from the storm, but deeper into its heart. The villagers shuddered at her words, for no mortal sought the center of such fury. Yet she insisted the storm was not an end, but a doorway waiting to be opened. Night after night, her visions grew clearer, guiding her with images no map could hold. She saw a circle of calm, hidden inside the chaos, a place where waves bowed. There, she felt, Poseidon waited, not as destroyer, but as teacher of forgotten truths. The elders gathered in council, torn between disbelief and the weight of her dreams. Some argued the sea could never be understood, only endured with patience and reverence. Others whispered the prophecy spoke of one who would walk into the storm unafraid. The girl listened to their doubts, but her resolve only grew like flame in darkness. She began to teach children songs from her dreams, melodies that echoed like tides. Even the storm seemed to pause at times, thunder softening when her voice filled the air. The villagers watched, unsettled, yet strangely comforted by the courage in her eyes. She was no longer just a dreamer, but a bridge between mortals and the deep. And though no one dared to admit it aloud, hope flickered like a candle in them. For if the storm truly held a message, perhaps she was the one meant to hear. The endless storm might not have come to break them, but to awaken them instead. And through the dreams of one girl, the sea had begun to speak once more. The dreamer's visions grew stronger, painting the storm with meanings unseen by mortal eyes. She began to sense patterns in the waves, as if each surge carried messages across the deep. The villagers gathered nightly, listening as she spoke of signs drawn by lightning in the sky. She told them the storm was not blind chaos, but a language of the sea itself. Each flash was a word, each thunder a sentence, each shifting tide a verse of truth. Though they feared the storm, they leaned closer, desperate for meaning in endless darkness. One evening, she described a circle of calm, at the storm's hidden center, glowing like dawn. She said Poseidon waited there, holding a secret older than the sea itself. Some doubted, whispering she was touched by madness, her mind swallowed by wind and wave. But others felt their hearts stir, for hope often hides in the smallest sparks of belief. A fisherman stood, declaring he had once seen calm seas in the eye of a gale. He said the dreamer's words rang true, echoing what he had glimpsed years before. The villagers began to argue, torn between fear of false hope and longing for escape. Through it all, the dreamer remained still, her eyes fixed on a horizon no one else saw. She told them the storm would not pass until they chose to walk into its heart. The choice was theirs, not hers, but she would not turn away from the calling. She taught them chants from her dreams, words that echoed with rhythms of rising tide. When they spoke together, even the winds seemed to hesitate, as if listening. Children repeated the songs in play, their laughter carried strangely calm across the roaring night. The storm, though endless, felt different, less like punishment, more like a test unfolding. Elders recalled ancient myths where gods cloaked wisdom inside trials of thunder and rain. They began to see the storm not as prison, but as a doorway waiting to be opened. The dreamer's presence grew like a flame that could not be extinguished by fear. She carried herself as though guided, her steps calm even on trembling ground. The villagers started to prepare, not to endure, but to journey where the sea demanded. Boats were mended in silence, hands steady though hearts beat heavy with doubt. They gathered dried fish, jars of grain, and ropes woven strong enough to hold against waves. Each task was done with reverence, as if they built not boats, but offerings to the divine. The dreamer walked among them, touching each vessel, whispering words she had heard in visions. It was not blessing, but guidance, shaping their courage into something unshakable. And so the village, once broken by endless fear, began to breathe with new rhythm. The storm still roared above, but beneath its fury, hope had found a fragile voice. And within that voice lived a promise that the sea was not only wrath, but revelation. What awaited in the heart of the storm was no longer terror, but truth yet unseen. The day of departure came with skies darker than ever, yet the village carried a strange calm. Boats stood ready, their wooden frames patched, their sails waiting like wings held by prayer. The dreamer walked to the shore, her steps unhurried, her eyes lit with quiet fire. Behind her followed families, fishermen, elders, and children, hearts heavy yet steady in rhythm. The storm roared, but its voice now sounded less like threat, more like a summons. Waves surged and withdrew, as if testing, daring the villagers to take the first step. The dreamer raised her hands, whispering words learned in sleep, and silence touched the air. For a heartbeat, thunder ceased, and lightning waited, as though the sea leaned in to listen. The villagers climbed into boats, carrying food, rope, and faith, woven tighter than wood. Each vessel rocked with the weight of their hope, fragile yet unbroken by fear. The dreamer stood at the prow, her gaze fixed not on the shore, but the storm's heart. The sea lifted them high, then cast them low, yet the boats held against the pull. Children clutched mothers, elders clutched prayers, but the dreamer clutched only her vision. Her voice rose above the winds, chanting words no one had known, yet somehow remembered. The storm answered with lightning that did not strike but circled, guiding the path ahead. Waves parted just enough for their vessels to press forward, narrow yet certain. Fishermen gasped, for they had never seen the sea bend in such obedience. They rowed with arms steady, each pull carving courage into the water's skin. The deeper they went, the louder the storm roared. Yet their fear did not return. Instead, awe filled them, as though walking within a story older than their names. The dreamer closed her eyes, whispering that Poseidon was near, his voice woven in the tide. Some swore they heard it too, a low hum beneath thunder, vast yet strangely tender. The boats pressed forward until the horizon itself seemed to vanish into walls of water. The storm towered like a fortress, lightning flashing like gates opening for chosen guests. The villagers held their breath as the dreamer stretched her arms to the sky. She cried out words no one had taught her, yet each syllable rang like truth. The waves rose, not to destroy, but to cradle, lifting their boats with care. In that moment, the villagers realized the sea was no longer enemy but guide. They were not trespassers in its domain, but travelers led into its hidden heart. The storm raged above, but within, a strange calm began to grow. It was the calm of purpose, the silence before a revelation waiting to unfold. The dreamer opened her eyes, and her voice broke like dawn across the storm. She told them the journey had only begun, and Poseidon's truth lay just beyond. The villagers looked ahead, no longer bound by fear, but bound by destiny. And into the endless storm they sailed, chasing the light only dreams could see. The boats pressed deeper into the storm, yet the sea seemed to shift around them like a living maze. Walls of water rose high, then opened into corridors lit by flashes of silver lightning. The villagers rowed in silence, their breaths quick, their eyes wide with awe and dread. The dreamer stood tall at the prow, her voice steady as she hummed her strange chant. Each note seemed to weave with the wind, bending the storm's fury into patterns of calm. The fishermen whispered that the sea obeyed her, though none dared to say it aloud. Above, the sky cracked open, showing glimpses of stars hidden for endless days. Children pointed with trembling hands, for they had begun to forget what stars looked like. The sight gave them strength, a reminder that beyond the storm, light still lived. But soon the waves grew darker, their peaks curling like hands ready to close. The dreamer's chant grew louder, her words echoing against thunder as if challenging its voice. The boats creaked, wood straining, yet they did not break, as if carried by unseen hands. The villagers began to feel time blur. Each moment stretched long as the waves themselves. Some wondered if they had crossed into a realm not of men, but of gods. The storm seemed endless, yet purposeful, guiding them deeper into its roaring heart. Then, without warning, the waters calmed, forming a circle vast as the village itself. The waves stilled, and the air grew heavy, thick with the weight of unspoken truth. It was as if the sea held its breath, waiting for something to be revealed. The villagers dared not speak, their silence deep as the still water surrounding them. The dreamer lowered her voice to a whisper, saying they had reached the eye of the storm. She told them Poseidon was near, closer than breath, watching with eyes older than time. Lightning arced above, not in rage, but in slow, deliberate lines across the sky. It formed shapes like tridents, like waves, like gates carved of pure light. The villagers fell to their knees, trembling not in fear, but in reverence of the sight. They felt small yet chosen, fragile yet carried by the sea's infinite strength. The dreamer lifted her hands and closed her eyes, calling out to the unseen God. Her words were simple, a plea not for safety, but for understanding of the storm. The waters stirred, not violent, but vast, as if something deep awoke in the silence. A low hum filled the air, shaking the boats, rattling bones, and stirring hidden memories. It was not thunder, not wind, but a voice rising from the bottom of the sea. The villagers gasped, for though no words were clear, they felt meaning in their hearts. It was a language older than speech, a truth carried in wave and tide. The dreamer opened her eyes, tears shining, whispering that Poseidon had begun to answer. And though the sea was far from finished, they knew they had crossed into his presence. The endless storm was no longer just a trial, but the beginning of revelation. The sea grew still, yet beneath its surface, power pulsed like a heart too vast to measure. The villagers clung to their boats, waiting, their breaths shallow, their eyes fixed on the dreamer. She stood unmoving, her gaze lost in the waters that now seemed to whisper her name. The hum grew stronger, shaping itself into tones, deep and steady as if the ocean spoke. No words could be heard, yet every soul felt its meaning, carved directly into their hearts. The storm above circled like a crown, lightning bending into tridents that hung across the sky. The villagers trembled, but not from fear. Something older, something sacred stirred within them. The dreamer lifted her hand, and the waters beneath her boat rippled like listening skin. She whispered that Poseidon's voice was not of anger, but of remembrance long forgotten. The sea, she said, carried memory, holding the stories of every life that touched its tide. It was not punishment, but a reminder, a call to remember what mortals had lost. The villagers listened, their hearts heavy, for the storm no longer seemed endless, but purposeful. Each roll of thunder felt like a command to awaken, to see beyond fear and hunger. The dreamer's tears fell into the sea, and the waves calmed as if receiving her offering. One elder cried aloud, confessing he had cursed the storm, not knowing it was a gift. A fisherman bowed his head, whispering thanks for the strength the storm had forced upon him. Even the children felt it, though they could not name it, a weight of sacred truth. The hum deepened, and a great surge of water rose, but it did not strike. Instead, it shaped itself into a column, towering yet gentle, glowing faintly with blue light. The villagers gasped, for they knew this was no wave, but Poseidon's living presence. The column bent low, not as a master over slaves, but as a teacher over children. The dreamer spoke, her voice woven with the hum, repeating the god's hidden message. He did not wish destruction, but remembrance, that mortals must honor the sea's eternal bond. They had taken its gifts for granted, forgetting that the ocean was life, not only resource. The storm was a reminder that the sea was not theirs to command, but to revere. The villagers bowed their heads, each one feeling shame, yet also relief and understanding. The endless storm was never meant to destroy, but to awaken memory of respect. The dreamer's chant rose once more, now joined by every voice across the small boats. Together, they sang, a melody carried into the winds, strong enough to steady the sky. Lightning softened, thunder gentled, and the sea's hum became a deep, steady rhythm of peace. The column of water slowly lowered, dissolving back into the waves without rage or force. Yet its presence lingered, etched into the hearts of all who had witnessed the revelation. The villagers knew their journey was not done, but they now carried a truth unbreakable. They had seen Poseidon not as wrath, but as guardian of balance between sea and man. And though the storm still circled, they felt its edge thinning, as if awaiting their choice. Would they return to shore as they once were, or live forever changed by the sea? The dreamer's eyes burned with quiet fire, for she knew their answer had only begun. The dawn broke, and the storm still lingered, a shroud of gray woven across the horizon. The villagers sat in silence, their boats drifting like fallen leaves on a restless river. They were no longer the same, for the sea had etched its truth into their very breath. The dreamer stood tall, her eyes glowing faintly as though carrying the reflection of waves. She whispered that Poseidon had given them a gift, but gifts demanded choice and action. The sea would not calm until their hearts turned fully to honor what they had forgotten. The villagers looked at one another, weary yet aware, sensing the weight of this moment. One by one, voices rose, each declaring promises to change, to live with respect for the sea. The elders spoke of teaching the children that water was not endless, but sacred in essence. The fishermen vowed to take only what was needed, leaving the sea its strength to thrive. Mothers promised to bless their children with songs of tides so memory would not fade. The storm listened, its clouds trembling like a chest exhaling after a long-held breath. The dreamer raised her hands, calling the voices to weave together into a single chant. It was a hymn of remembrance, born not of fear, but of love for the ocean's embrace. The chant grew strong, echoing across the waves, rising into the restless clouds above. Lightning softened into silver threads, stretching wide like a net of peace across the sky. Thunder rolled gently, no longer threatening, but resonant like a drumbeat of renewal. The storm began to part, and the first golden rays of sun touched the trembling sea. The villagers wept, not from sorrow but release, as if their souls had been unburdened. The dreamer's voice faded, yet her presence glowed like a flame that could not be extinguished. She told them Poseidon's storm would always return, not to punish, but to remind them. Remind them that balance was not a gift kept once, but a practice renewed each day. The sea was eternal, and so too must be their devotion, their respect, their gratitude. The villagers nodded, their hearts steady, their spirits now bound to the ocean's rhythm. The endless storm was no longer feared, but embraced as guardian of their living memory. They returned their boats to shore, each stroke of the oar echoing a vow unspoken. The land welcomed them, yet they carried the sea's breath within, a bond unbreakable. Children ran to greet them, and the villagers shared the story of the storm's truth. Songs were taught, fires were lit, and the village became a place of ocean's worship. The dreamer walked last, her gaze upon the sea, whispering thanks to the unseen god. The waves shimmered in reply, as if Poseidon himself had heard and smiled in silence. The storm dissolved completely, leaving a calm so deep it felt like a sacred embrace. But the villagers knew the calm was not the end, only the rhythm of the cycle. For the endless storm was not gone, only resting, waiting to rise when memory dimmed. And so they lived with reverence, never forgetting the night the sea had spoken. The dreamer's eyes carried both sorrow and hope, knowing the cycle was eternal. But she also knew the village had changed, their hearts woven into Poseidon's endless tide. The storm was endless, yes, but so too was their devotion, their love for the sea. The village rested, bathed in golden light, its people breathing easier under the calm sky. The storm had gone, yet its echo lingered like a song that never truly ends. Children played by the shore, their laughter carried by the same winds that once roared. Elders sat in circles, retelling the story of Poseidon's storm as if it had happened ages ago. Fishermen mended nets, but their hands were gentler, their eyes sharper with newfound respect. Mothers sang lullabies of waves and tides, planting seeds of memory in young hearts. The sea shimmered, calm yet watchful, its presence felt in every grain of sand. The dreamer walked among them, quiet, her gaze always drawn back to the horizon. She knew the storm was not an end, but part of an endless cycle of remembrance. Balance was not granted once, but earned each day with humility and devotion. The villagers now carried this truth, their lives woven into the sea's eternal rhythm. The storm had not taken from them, it had returned something forgotten and sacred. They had found strength not in resistance, but in surrender to harmony. The endless storm had become their teacher, their reminder, their silent guardian. At night, the stars shone bright, reflected in the sea like countless divine eyes watching. The villagers gathered by the fire, telling stories that carried both warning and hope. They spoke of fear, of awe, but also of gratitude for the God who had spared them. The dreamer's voice joined theirs, her words soft, yet carrying weight beyond measure. She reminded them that Poseidon's gift was fragile, like a flame needing constant care. If they forgot, the sea would remind them again, with storms that tested their hearts. But if they remembered, the sea would bless them, giving life without taking in anger. The villagers swore to never forget, to pass the tale through generations. Every net cast, every boat launched, every child's song would carry respect for the sea. The horizon glowed faintly, as if Poseidon himself had heard their promises. Waves lapped the shore, gentle yet eternal, whispering blessings in their endless rhythm. The village thrived, no longer fearing the storm, but embracing its sacred lesson. They lived lighter, yet stronger, bound not by chains, but by reverence. The storm was endless, but so too was their devotion, their song of remembrance. The dreamer smiled faintly, knowing her role was done, yet never truly complete. For she too was part of the cycle, chosen by the sea to bear its voice. One night, as the moon cast silver paths upon the waves, she stood alone. The water glowed faintly, rippling as though welcoming her back into its embrace. She whispered thanks and closed her eyes, listening to the deep hum of eternity. The sea answered, not with words, but with silence vast enough to hold all memory. And in that silence, she knew Poseidon was watching, guiding, waiting. The village would endure, the storm would return, the song would continue. For the sea is endless, and so is the story of those who honor it. Thus the endless storm of Poseidon lived on, not in fear, but in eternal reverence.